Hi, my name is T, and today I'm going to teach you how to build the perfect audio effect rack in Ableton Live. Now, this is probably one of my favorite tools because it serves so many uses, and the macros are fully customizable. If you build it right, it could save you a lot of time and a lot of CPU. So first, what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at one of my favorite racks that I've built and examine what each one of the parameters are doing. Then we're going to have a look at how this applies in a real life situation by testing it with a synth loop that I have. And then we're going to deconstruct it and rebuild it from scratch just so it can maybe inspire you and give you ideas on how you can customize your own rack that will fit your own needs. All right, let's do it. So here's my rack that I've built, and I'm going to quickly go through the 8 macros that I've assigned. And then we'll have a look at what's behind them. So the first one's a low pass, second one's a high pass here. I have a drive, which is basically an overdrive. This digital one is a bit reduction, essentially. I have 2 parameters for a delay and then 2 parameters for a reverb. Now they're color coordinated, so my eyes just have a better idea of where to go to right away. Now, I have 6 devices, essentially, that's powering these. I have a saturator, which is associated with the drive, the redux to the digital, the reverbs to these 2 parameters here, and then I have an echo that's associated to the echo, the high pass, which is the high pass, and that's just an auto filter, and I have another auto filter that is set to the low pass. Now, as you can see, these are all stock plugins. Just so I like to make sure that if I have this rack opened up on someone else's system or elsewhere, that it'll still all work. So I'm going to play this synth loop that I have here, and first I'm going to deactivate this rack so you can hear the synth loop in its raw form. Then I'm going to reactivate the rack, which you're still not going to hear anything because in its default state, these devices are deactivated. So I'm going to start moving each knob, then you'll really start hearing the effect of each macro that I have set. Okay, so here we go. Alright, so now that we know what this sounds like, let's deconstruct this rack and see how I got there. We're going to build from scratch, but I'm only going to go through the low pass, high pass, and drive. Reason being, if I go through all this, it's going to take me forever. But the low pass, high pass, and the drive, they have the most complex mappings, and if you understand what's going on in those 3, you're going to understand how to reconstruct the rest with ease. So let's go ahead and start building back this low pass, high pass, and drive. First, we need to grab the 2 auto filters that create the low and the high pass, and the saturator, which creates the drive. I'm going to now do that in the browser. Find my saturator. I'm going to get my auto filter, and here we go. 2 auto filters, bam. Great. So I'm going to select the saturator and hold shift, select the auto filter. So now we have made a selection of all 3 devices. Then we press Command G, and it's officially an audio effect rack now. I'm gonna mute this because we're not using this now. But it's good to keep this here for reference. So I'm gonna press this button here, which is the macro button. So now we can see the same macro menu here. And the first thing we're gonna do now is press map, and you can see everything turns green, which means these parameters are now mappable, assignable essentially, to these macros here. Now I'm gonna pull up the browser just so we could see the macro mappings now. So this happens when we press the map. You can see it, the browser turns into macro mappings. So the first one we're gonna reconstruct is the low pass. I'm gonna go into macro 1. I'm gonna rename this LP for low pass. And I'm gonna choose this auto filter here, rename this LP as well. Just so you know, we can focus on that one auto filter. I'm just gonna deactivate these two here by getting out of mappings and deactivating those two. So we're now just focused on working on the low pass. So what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to get the frequency to respond to this macro, because what do I want to do? I want to be able to, what I did here in my actual rack was I had it at 127, and as soon as I was moving this knob down, it was giving me the low pass filter, right? So I'm going to take this frequency and I'm going to map it to the low pass. So now you could see if I move this macro, it's corresponding to the low pass on the right here. And you can see that's also being reflected in the macro mappings menu over here. So this is just a very linear low pass. I want to add some character to it, so I actually want this macro to be controlling multiple parameters in this low pass. So specifically, I actually want it to be controlling the resonance. I'm going to click this resonance now, and I'm going to map it on the low pass knob as well. And now you can see when I move this macro knob, it's adjusting both the frequency and the resonance. Now, I don't know if I want this crazy peak here in the high end when I get to the higher frequencies. So how do I fix that? Go to the macro mappings, and you can see there is a min and a max. So what this is telling me is when I'm at my max, the resonance is at 125%. And when I'm at my minimum, which is 0, here at the low pass 0, it's at 0%, and you can see in the resonance to the right here, that is being reflected. Now, if I don't want this extreme peak, I go into the max and I turn it down. And now I have a gentler resonance. So I'm just gonna double check with my original rack to see if it is behaving the same way. Okay, so you could see that in my original rack, the low pass resonance actually is greater when I get to the lower frequencies. It doesn't behave the same way here. I'm just gonna minimize the saturator by double clicking and double clicking the auto filter in the header, just so we can see better. You can see it doesn't behave the same way. This is getting, the peak gets higher in the lower frequencies, and this peak gets lower in the lower frequencies. So what do I have to do to match that type of behavior? I need to go back into my macro mappings and make sure that I dial this down, and when I'm at the minimum, that I dial this percentage up, so that when I'm back in my old rack, okay, this looks about right, and then I go to roughly 111, I'm gonna go to 111, and you can see I gotta turn down my max a little bit here. Perfect, so now this should behave the same way. I'm just gonna double check. There we go, that's pretty close. Okay, great. So I have this same characteristic. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but actually let me bypass this for a second. But as soon as I hit 127, you can see the device is turned off. But when I dial it back, the device turns back on. So how do I get that same behavior in my new rack that I'm creating here? I need to make sure that first and foremost, I assign the device on-off button to this low pass as well. So I'm going to first do that by clicking on this on-off, and then I'm going to press map. Now let's see what happens. Okay, it is not behaving the way I want it to. Why? Well, it is probably the min and the max. So how do we have to set this in order for it to behave the same way as this? As we can see here, when it's at its max, it's off. But as soon as I hit 126, it turns on, all the way to 0. So I need to tell Ableton that at its max, the device is on only at 126. And it stays on all the way to 0. Because otherwise, you're going to see what happens here. It's off at 127, on at 126, and then off at 64, below 64. So I need to tell this to go to 0. Perfect. There we have it. There's our low pass. So it's really about setting the minimum and the maximum to make it make these macros behave the way you want it to. Great. So I have the low pass, and it and the on-off is corresponding to what's happening here. Great. So let's set the next one. High pass. I'm just going to rename this right away. Whoops. HP. I'm going to rename this as HP as well. So first, this is not a high pass right now. I'm going to get out of map mode and make sure I switch to a high pass filter. Great, so now that it's a high pass filter, I can get to work. Same thing here, right? I basically want the same characteristics as my low pass, but inverted. Everything would be inverted. So I already know what I'm doing here. I want the frequency mapped to the high pass. I want the resonance mapped to the high pass. And I also want device on-off mapped to the high pass. So right now I have those three things mapped to the high pass. Great. Now they're not behaving the way I want it to. None of those parameters are. So what do I have to adjust? First, I'm going to look at first look at the resonance. So if I close in my old one, the low pass, I open up the high pass, I can see that the resonance is much gentler. So roughly in my low here, at the low frequencies, you could already see that the percentage shouldn't be that high. So I'm going to go in my high pass, and under minimum, I'm just going to, this is actually because of the maximum. So I'm going to go to the maximum and dial this down a little bit here. Perfect. So now when I get up to here, that's a little closer. I'm still going to dial it down. Perfect. And you can see the curve's not the same. It's probably because it is a 12 pole. There we go. So that looks a little more like it. Perfect. So now we just have to adjust the device on-off. So what is it doing here? It's off when it's at 0, but as soon as I hit 2, it turns on, right? So same logic here. What I want to do is make sure that the max is at 127 because I do want it on, but I want it on from 1 to 127, right? So that as soon as I move this knob here, then it turns on. So that's how you adjust these minimum and maximum behaviors. Is you just got to think when you want these parameters to be to be activated in a sense. Great, so I have my low pass, I have my high pass, and then now I got to do my saturator. So the saturator, what do I want to be happening here? I want this to drive, but at the same time, I don't want this to be crushing my output and just completely fuzzing up the entire sound. What do I mean by this? If I just turn this on, and right now these aren't, the low pass and high pass aren't activated, so we're not even gonna hear that. But if I just turn this on and I play this sound, that's super loud. So what I ideally want to happen is, as I'm cranking the drive, this output comes down as well, so that it sounds more like this. So basically, I want to create an inverse relationship between these two. That when I crank the drive up, the output comes down, right? So how do we do that? It's like a crazy math equation here. So I'm just gonna set these back at 0. I'm gonna go back into mapping. Now I know I want to map the drive, and I want to map the output. I want the minimum of the drive to be at 0. I also want, because I want the behavior of when I'm at 0, this should be at 0, but as I crank this, this gets cranked as well. But now I need to fix the output because they're both just getting super loud. Now, how do I make the output inversed? Well, I want that when I'm at 0, the output is at 0. So that means the output when I'm at my minimum should be at 0, which is here. Now, how do I get the output to inversely behave? I'm gonna have to set this to -36 when I'm at my max, so that now when I turn this knob, they're both inversely going against each other. Now, I like to kind of tweak this a little bit, just because I like to drive it a little harder than you know. So hold on, I'm gonna do that, and here we go. So now you can see that when I'm at 0, everything's at 0, everything's fine and dandy. But then as soon as I start driving this, start adjusting this knob, it's actually driving it a little harder because the drive is greater than the output here. So you'll hear the sound. So that's essentially creating the inverse relationship between these two knobs. And then last but not least, obviously assigning this device on off. So at 0, it should be off. And then as soon as I turn it, it should be on. So that would be 0 and 1. So now it's off, and now it's on. So there you have it. I'm gonna rename this actually drive. So you can see, I'm just going to expand this so that it's very clear. Nothing's on right now. But as soon as I move the knobs, then they turn on. So I really hope that helped. I hope that inspires you to, create your own racks and make use of these racks, because, like I said, you just put one of these things on, and with the way it's set up, it could save you a lot of CPU, and it can just save you a lot of time. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great day.